Hello everybody, this is Namanjan and welcome to this very first tutorial on how to make a role-playing game. Now, a lot of you people might have already watched my old videos on how to make a Diablo style game. But if you have already watched that, I would recommend you to watch this series again. And for people who haven't watched them at all, you can still watch this series from fresh and start. And the reason I'm restarting this series is because Unity 4.6 is out, and there's so many different ways of making this role-playing game and so many better ways of implementing a role-playing game now. And I think it is really necessary to start again. And let's move on. So the first thing you're going to see here is the Unity website, and this is where you're going to download the game, the Unity engine from. And we're going to use this Unity engine to actually make a role-playing game. So this Unity engine is going to give you all the basic components and requirements to make the game. And also, I would like to mention the asset store over here, where we are going to download all the graphical assets, because I'm going to teach you the programming part of Unity, and this is where we are going to download all the graphical part of Unity. And let's get started. To basically download this game engine, go to unity3d.com and click on the download link right over here. Once you have downloaded Unity, you can go ahead and install the Unity program, and we're going to create a new project over here. So we're going to call this new project Role Playing Game, or we're just going to call it RPG. And make sure that the option you choose over here is a 3D, since we're going to make a 3D game. And let's go ahead. So once you have created a new project, you're gonna get a screen that looks similar to this. And if you haven't got a screen similar to this, you can go to the top right and click on this button at the most top right and choose default. And I'm gonna explain you what is the purpose of each of these individual screens over here. So first of all, here is a hierarchy, and this is where all your game objects and basically all the objects that you instantiate in your game is gonna be shown. And this scene view is where all you can manage all your scene objects and all your object and basically your game, and you can move stuff around. And we're gonna talk about moving stuff and controlling stuff around in just a moment. And this is the game screen which the players are gonna see. So this is the perspective from the player itself. And this is where the testing of the game is mostly going to be in. And here is the inspector, which gives more information about the game objects you place in your scene or in your game. So it gives each component of your game object and more details about your game object. And down here is a projects folder, basically listing all the assets and the folders you are making currently. And you have a console over here, which is used for showing you all the errors and warnings while we do some scripting. And I'm just going to rearrange the screen since I don't like this a lot. I'm going to move the hierarchy over here. And, whoops. Over there, and that is fine. And I'm just going to move this below. And that is how I personally like to have my screen. You might choose a different one, but it is completely fine. And now let's go ahead and start making a game. So first of all, we are going to create a terrain over here. So we're going to go into game objects and 3D objects and create a terrain. And instantly you're going to see that we created a massive terrain over here. And if you go to the terrain script over here and go to the setting button over here, which looks like a gear, you're going to see all the information about the terrain over here. And if you want to change the size of the terrain, you can go to resolution over here and change the terrain width and terrain height. You can change it to anything you want to, like that. And let's go. And whenever you click on an object in your hierarchy, it takes you towards the object and zooms in. And now we're going to learn how to move objects around. and get comfortable with moving them and scaling them up and down, so that we can start creating our game very smoothly. So first of all, to rotate around in the scene, you need to press Alt and click and rotate around. If you're already currently selecting an object, it's going to rotate around the object. Now to move around the scene, you can just use your arrow keys. And that is basically most of the movement, basically. So let's go ahead and start scripting our very first functionality. So first, what we're going to do is create a click to move functionality, where we're going to click on the terrain and our player is going to move towards the terrain. But before we do that, we are actually going to create some obstacles, so that the player has to move around the obstacles while moving to its destination. So let's go ahead and create a game object and create a 3D object, which is a cube. And you'll see that you have a cube just right in front of you. Now to move this cube around, you need to go to the top left of your screen and press this button with 4 arrows. And you're going to get these 3 arrows around the cube, which you can use to move around. Now to scale the object, to make it bigger or shorter, you can go to the inspector and go to the transform component over here and change the scale value. You can change it to 10, 10, and 10, anything you want to, and it's going to increase the size. So for now, we're just going to have the X value to be 10 and the Y value to be 10 and the Z value to be 1. And you're just going to move it a little bit down. And if you're not able to see anything, and then if it is really dark, that is probably because your light button over here is toggled off in the top left of your screen. And you can toggle it on and everything's going to be bright. And then you can copy it again. And we're just going to make some obstacles. And copy it again. To copy it, I'm just using Command C and Command V on a Mac. You probably, if you're on Windows, you're going to use Control C and Control V. And now what we're going to do is we're going to change this rotation. So to change the rotation, we're going to go to the top left of the screen and click these 2 arrows over here and rotate it like this. You can also change the rotation in the inspector and make it -90 to make it accurate and precise. You can also change the position using the inspector as well. So we're just going to make a little thing over here as an obstacle for our player, which is not born yet, to go around. And that is going to be our obstacle, and we're going to make a player over here. So we're going to create a 3D object and create a cube. And this is going to be our player, and we're going to go to the inspector and name it player. And we're going to tag it player. We're going to go to tag and tag it player. We're just going to click on it and zoom in. And to zoom in and out, you can use the scroll option. And what we're going to do is we're just going to make its Y scale a little bigger. We're going to make it to 3. Just so it looks more like a human. But it doesn't look like one yet. Remember, for now we're going to use cubes and walls, these cube walls. But later on, as we progress, we're going to download graphical assets from the asset store, which will make it look much better and much more realistic. So let's go ahead, and we have our player over here, and we're going to create another 3D object over here. And we're going to make this a nose, so we know which direction our player is facing at. So we're just going to, if you go to the top left of your screen and click this button over here, you're going to get a scaling option. Like this. You can also change the scaling in your inspector. So I'm going to put it as 0.4 and 0.4. And move it inwards like that. So our player has a little nose. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this nose, and we're going to drag it into the player. So now what happens is nose is a child of player. What that means is nose is always going to follow player. Whenever you move player around or rotate player around, nose is going to rotate and move with player. So it's a child. It's always going to follow the player. So now that we have our player, in our camera we can actually not see anything clearly over here. So what we are going to do is first we're going to make a light. So we're going to go to game object and light, and create a point light over there, and we're going to move it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the inspector and change the range from 10 to 100 so that it's brighter and we can see stuff. You'll notice that the moment we put in a light, our light button here is toggled off. That is because by default, once we have lighting in our scene, Unity toggles off the light, the lighting option, the default lighting option. So now we can see how our own lighting affects the scene. And now you'll see that we can see a little bit more in our from our camera. So now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna go to our main camera and move this around in such a way that we can actually see stuff from our camera. So camera is basically the perspective of the player's eyes and how the player is going to see. As you can see, we have a camera preview over here. As you select the camera, if you deselect it, it's going to go away. You're going to select it, we're going to move it a little bit forward and rotate it a little bit downward, just like that. And move it in such a way that we can actually see the whole scene over here. There we go. And now we can see almost everything we made. Okay, so now that we have everything set up in terms of creating objects, we're going to create a navigation mesh. And now a navigation mesh is the thing that is going to help the player to navigate around this obstacle. So this is going to help the player to move towards its destination. And the destination is defined by the point where we click on the terrain. So if I click over here, what we're going to say is, we're going to say the player use the navigation mesh to move to the point where I clicked, which is a destination. It might sound a little bit confusing, but as you progress, it's going to be very simple. And in fact, it is not very hard at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to help over here at the top, and we're going to type in navigation. And we're going to go over here. So we're going to actually go to Windows, and we're going to go to navigation. Sorry about that. And you're going to get this nice little window over here. And you're going to go to bake. And I'm going to click bake. And it's going to ask you to save scene. And we're just going to save it as home_scene. Now you will notice that we have a navigation mesh, and the blue area shows the walkable, where the player can walk. But however, you can see that if you remove these cubes and you go to the baking, you can clearly see that it shows that these things are walkable, but in fact they're not. And the reason why it does that is because we did not set these to be static. Before you even bake a mesh, you need to set them to be static. Now what that does is it tells Unity that these objects are static and it'll never move. And once they're marked static and you bake, you're going to see that it marks these walls as unwalkable. As you can see, the blue mesh does not link each other into the wall. That is because it defines that to be unwalkable. However, you can see that our player the surface below our player shows it to be walkable, and that's because we did not set our player to be static. Okay, so once we have baked our mesh, it's important to note that if we move our obstacles around, the mesh does not update itself, so it is static, and that is the definition of static. So now that we have everything set, we still have one last thing to go actually. Now that we have our navigation mesh, we need a navigation agent to move our player around. So we're gonna use a nav mesh agent. And when we use a nav mesh agent, it is important to turn off the box collider of the player and also the box collider of the nose. Make sure to turn them off, because then the navigation mesh is going to go a little crazy with the physics and all. So now that we have our navigation mesh agent, this mesh agent is actually going to help us navigate around the mesh. And you can increase the radius as you want to. We're just going to make it 0.75. As you can see, that is a radius. Or make it 0.9. And other than that, everything looks completely fine. And we're just going to pick it up a little bit so that it's above the terrain. And we have everything set, and now we can start scripting our very first script. Okay, so to make our very first script, we're gonna go into the player object and go to the inspector and add a new component, and we're gonna call it click to move. And we're gonna create an add. And as you'll see, as you create a component over here, a script, it's gonna add the script to the asset. Now, whenever you create a script, and we're gonna make it in C#, so remember to make it a C# when you say new script. Make sure the language is in C# since you'll be programming in C#. So when, you can think of a script as a functionality to an object. So for example, now we're adding a click to move functionality, and hence we're gonna add a new script called click to move. So let's go ahead and click start scripting our click to move script. So go ahead and click on it, and it's going to take a while to open. And I'll just zoom in the code. And here you're going to see a couple of lines already generated for you. Public class click to move extends mode of behavior, semicolon. This stuff I'm going to explain later since it's not very important now. But here you can see here void starts open bracket close bracket. What this means is that whatever code you're going to put in these pieces of line over here, these lines of code is going to be executed when you start the game. So for example, when I say debug.log hello world, so when debug.log basically means that it's going to print out stuff in the console. So whenever you do that and you press the play button, it's going to print out hello world once when the game initializes, when the game starts. And that is what it says over here, use this for initialization, which means that use this for initializing objects when the game starts. And update is basically called once every frame, and a frame is called typically 60 times a second, but it really depends on your computer. So when you do a debug.log over here, and you're gonna play it, you're gonna see that the number of times hello world is played over here is increasing. I have collapsed on over here, but if I off it, you're gonna see that it keeps on printing hello world because it prints once every frame. So what we want to do is we want to move this player to our destination, which is a point where we click. So first we need to record the point at where we click on the terrain. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do something called a raycast, and what this means is we're gonna send a ray from our camera over here, which is over here, and we're gonna send a ray from starting from our camera pointing towards our mouse, and what that ray is gonna hit to the terrain, and we're gonna record the point at which the ray hit the terrain. If it sounds confusing, it is not very hard in practice. It's going to be very, very easy, and I'm going to explain how to do it over here. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to create a ray cast hit, and we're going to call it hit. And this is going to hold the information at the point where our ray hit the terrain. So our ray is going to hit the terrain, and whenever it hits the terrain, this variable is going to hold that information about the position of the point it hit the terrain. And then we're going to create our array, and it's going to be camera that dot main camera. So we're going to take the reference of the main camera, which is this one over here. So it's going to take the main camera, this one, and we're going to point towards the screen point to array. So second, there we go, screen point to array, and we're gonna say input dot mouse position. So it's going to point towards the mouse position, and that is what I said that we're gonna do. That's the logic. And then we're gonna create an if statement. Now if statements are conditional statements. So for example, if we create an if statement over here and say if 5 is bigger than 4, or 3, which is obvious, we're going to say debug.log 5 is bigger than 3. You're just going to print that out. So what's going to happen is it's going to check if 5 is bigger than 3, and it is true, and it's going to go and execute the code inside here. And we're going to go ahead and just play, and you can see it says 5 is bigger than 3. Now the reason it's keep on printing it out over here is because it's an update. And here we can create an else statement saying else debug.log it is not bigger. So for example, if I put 1 is bigger than 3, this is not true, of course. So it's not going to print this, but instead it's going to print this. And I'm going to say 1 is not bigger than 3. And as you can see, it's saying 1 is not bigger than 3. And so let's go ahead over here. And we're going to say if physics.raycast. So now this is going to cast the ray. So it's going to send the ray, and we're going to send it the ray. We're going to give it the ray. We're going to say cast this ray. We're going to give it a height, and we're going to say a distance. So what this means is that it's saying that we're going to cast this ray, and we're going to store the information in this variable if it hits something, and we're going to give it a distance of 100. So it's going to cast, the length of the ray is going to be 100. You can give it any value, to be honest, and it doesn't really matter. Well, it can't be too short, because if it is too short, it'll not reach the terrain, but make it long enough. And we're going to go over here, and for now we're going to say debug.log. We're going to say hit.point, and this is the position of the hit, of where it hit the terrain. I'm going to go ahead and check if this works. I'm going to go over here, and we're going to do one small change over here. We're only going to record where it hits the terrain when the player clicks on the terrain. So we're going to make another if statement over here outside of the previous one. Make sure it's outside, saying that if input.get mouse button down or up, anything you like. I usually like get mouse button up and give it 0. Now 0 is the left mouse button and 1 is the right mouse button. It might be the other way around, but it's one of them. And put the open bracket and make sure the closed bracket is after the inside if statement. So you can see the open bracket and closed bracket aligns over here for the outer if statement, and for the inner if statement it is inside. So what is going to happen is it's going to check if you've clicked on the mouse button, and then it's going to execute code inside here, and it's going to check if our array is hitting something, and then it's going to execute inside here. This is called a nested if statement, because you have an if statement inside another if statement. Now if you go ahead and click your left mouse button, it's going to give the coordinates of where it actually hits the terrain. So now we know that is working. We are actually going to use this position to tell the nav mesh agent in our player to move towards the position. So we're going to go ahead, and before we actually say the nav mesh agent the position, we need to retrieve the nav mesh agent. So over here we're going to go to the way all the way to the top. After public class, click to move. We're going to say nav mesh agent, and we're going to call it nav agent. And over here we're going to say nav agent is equal to get component nav mesh agent. So here what we're doing is we're saying that, okay, we have a nav mesh agent variable, and now a variable is used to store information. For example, we can have int x variable, and what this means is that we're going to store a variable named x of type int, and we can say x is equal to 5, and you're going to store that variable, that number in x. And similarly, we have a variable called nav agent of type nav mesh agent, which is this type over here, as you can see, nav mesh agent. And we're going to say nav agent is equal to get component nav mesh agent. So what this means is that we're retrieving this nav mesh agent by saying get component, and it's going to get the component on that game object. For example, if you add the click to move script over here, since this component does not have a nav mesh agent, when you run the program, this line is going to return null, which means nothing, since it does not have a nav mesh agent in here. So we're going to go back over here, and here we're going to say if our array hits the terrain and if the player has clicked the left mouse button, we're going to say nav agent dot set destination to hit dot point. So now we have set the destination. We're going to go ahead. We're going to play. And as you can see, as I click somewhere, the agent automatically moves over there. And if I click in the middle of this thing over here, it avoids all the obstacles and comes back over here very elegantly, as you can see over here. Now, of course, this nav mesh agent is really slow, so we can just increase the speed as you want to. If you go to inspector and change the properties, and you can change the acceleration and angular speed as you like. So that is basically how you create click to move scripts. Now, if you go back over here, if you remember, I told you about these static objects. Now, since they're static, I cannot move them. As you can see, I'm not allowed to move them while the game is playing. Now, if I stop the game and deactivate these cubes and play, you'll notice that even though the cubes are not there, sorry, 1 second. I'll just move even if the cube is not there and I click over here, it is going to assume that the walls are still there since we assumed they were static. So make sure to only make static objects when you're sure that they're not going to be there. And that is one bad point or con of a consequence of using navigation mesh, is that you cannot bake non-static objects. So if you have an object that is movable, the nav mesh agent will not be able to predict a path with movable objects. But usually it is fine. And this is how you create click to move scripts. So that was our very first tutorial on how to make a role-playing game. In the next tutorial, we're going to learn on how to implement more stuff like combat system to make it more interactive, and we're going to add enemies, etc. But for now, this is going to be enough. And if you have liked the video, please comment and tell me about how you like the video and improvements that I could make in teaching. And please subscribe if you've liked the video and share the video to all your friends who are interested in making a role-playing game. And thank you very much and have a good day.